Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. On this channel, we discuss day-to-day problems people face in their lives. Let's start with the video. My story with alcoholism and bad substance abuse habits is a rather long and tedious one, so I suggest you take a seat if you want to listen to it all the way through. I can almost say that I was predestined to take this route in life. It was a path that most of my family members and both my parents drowned in. And those very people raised me, in the same way that they were raised, which promised that I would end up exactly the way they did. Their roads in life ended probably sooner than they were supposed to. Simply put, my dad died of cirrhosis after alcohol literally destroyed his liver. He lived his entire life swinging away from bar to bar, spending his life savings and work payments on massive meaningless doses of alcohol, which he brought home to share with a wife that ended up dying of an overdose barely a couple years after I was born. Perhaps one would guess that it was a lifestyle that connected these two and a lifestyle that they continued on even after having brought kids into the world. But seeing how widespread it is in the family and how everybody seems to be interacted with drug abuse and alcoholism at some way or another, leads me to believe that it was a matter of predisposition and lack of resistance for addiction. One of the family members that I grew up with and bonded with as well as got attached to growing up was my cousin, who ended up dying of a cocaine overdose at a young prime age of 24 years old. He had barely graduated college and had his entire life ahead of him, but gave it away to substance abuse and devastated his parents during the rest of their lives, and damning them with the guilt of bad parenting when it just seems to be a curse that runs around the family. Quite honestly, that could have been possible with my destiny too, as I struggled for a good majority of my life with these substances. When I wasn't struggling with my parents, or better said, their absence because of them, I was struggling with the influence that me using had on the rest of my life. Of course, it always starts so subtle and you barely notice the influence of a weekend night out or a joint with a couple of friends. And then problems increase and drugs become a source of escapism and the only way for you to seek out joy in your life. I found myself trapped in strange people's houses with people overdosing on the kitchen floor, or I was being rushed to the hospital after having been found unconscious on the floor. That was my story. My life was almost given away into bad drinking habits or irresponsible drugs and psychedelic usages. However, I'm very glad to say that my life took a swift turn. The last time I came close to death, I was terrified and shaken to the extent I decided to completely change the course of my life and derail it from the doomed destination it was headed towards. I got out of the hospital that day and checked myself into a community rehab and got sober in the following 3 months and promised myself never to get anywhere near any alcohol or drugs for the rest of my life. That promise failed through the many years that followed. I did end up getting a loan from a bank and signing up to get an architecture degree in my city-state uni. I can safely say that I skipped death by a heartbeat. My life up until that point, I decided to sign myself up for a university, had been very fast-paced and on the edge. Now looking back at it, that it was so certainly not the life for me, and it was one that was destined to cause me either consistent devastation or simply death. In my 4th year of university, I was already 26 years old. Considering the fact that I signed up really late, I met the woman of my dreams and the love of my life, whom I ended up getting married to a couple of years later. She's one of the most intense, elegant, loving, caring, both hilarious and fascinating people I have ever had the honor of encountering. There was a little perk that came with her, which was the fact that she spoke French as a native language. That is because she's French and she grew up with her family in France in a suburban little town in which people despised technology and worshipped books, which would somewhat explain her intellect, but certainly not the rest of the amazing qualities she had. I never really had the pleasure of meeting her family, and considering the fact that they didn't live anywhere near us, they weren't able to make it to the wedding because our wedding was in the midst of the passing pandemic. As soon as flights were opened back up and the COVID dangers were declining once again, my wife and I decided to go to France so I could get a chance to meet her family and get to know them and have a good time, because there was no vacation better than one spent in France. That's what I would have said 2 months ago anyways. When we made it to her family's home, everything seemed exactly as she described it. The town was so calm and soothing and away from technology, and everybody did despite technology and worship books, which came to no surprise of mine. What did come to my surprise was the fact that you barely saw anybody who hadn't just had a glass of wine or didn't have a glass of wine in their hands, as this little village was one of the cornerstone winemaking areas in the country. Honestly, that just added to the romance of being in France and away from technology, being surrounded by a bunch of drunk, funny French-speaking folks. Couldn't have gone any better, or so I would have said. I quickly read I thought there would be a problem revealing itself when it comes to the wine drinking issue. I found myself being offered a glass of wine or a shot or a beverage of shots about an average of each 3 passing minutes. Everybody and their grandmother would be asking me to get a glass or get drunk for the night, and I found myself constantly having to explain to them the concept of sobriety, which nobody was familiar with, a concept which everyone seemed to find outrageous and unnecessary for the most part. People started spreading the word I didn't drink, and I found myself needing to express it less often. Although the problem stopped bugging me as much, the days were passing, and so it's been over the months, and quickly I was realizing that I needed to make it back home so I could resume my work and go back to my life, as it was rather uncomfortable sitting around all day with a bunch of drunk people having to struggle with a desire to join them and break my sobriety and get back to my old ways, which was clearly unhealthy. While my wife ran around with her cousins and sisters and family members all day long, having the time of her life, barely stopping to look back at me and check if I'm doing well, I was needing reminders of why I was remaining sober all the time, and it was quickly becoming a tedious and unnecessary source of immense struggle. Update. When I tried opening after my wife about my sentiments on the trip and needing to go home, she quickly shut me down and told me that I was over-exaggerating things and that it was just because everything was so strange to everybody, and being away from technology and everything gave them no way to be familiar with the concept of sobriety, and therefore they can't be blamed for suggesting that I drink with them because it was something everybody did starting at the age of 16. And as much as I hated being ignored and having my points belittled to a point of insignificance, I tried explaining to her that it wasn't because I blamed other people. It was that my addiction's grip on me was becoming stronger by the day, and it was just all too unnecessary. We have gone and seen the family, gotten to know them for almost 2 months, sitting around with them, and it was just about time to go home. She shut me out immediately without trying to understand my point or relate to it, and I felt very undermined and disrespected. I was very infuriated, to say the least, walked out on my arguments with my wife and into the kitchen to try to blow off some steam by drinking some water. I was joined by my mother-in-law, who more than anybody else had been ignoring the fact that I do not drink and insinuating that it was ridiculous for men of my age to act like a child and be unable to control my impulses, especially considering that I have no problem in my life or burdens to overdrink away. She kept on the attitude of undermining and mocking this sobriety journey and went as far as pouring a glass and putting it in front of my face, tempting me with it at a time when I was clearly in a state of distress. Having just fought with my wife, seeing that glass being waved in front of my face and noticing as the desire to take it from her hand increased, crushed whatever atom of calm collectiveness I had within me. Before I knew it, I found myself snapping at her, insulting and disrespecting all of her traditions and all of the thought process she put into guilting someone about their mental illness or their past struggles. I told her that there was no way for her to understand what I had been through and what reasons I have to drink and use substances and alcohol in an abnormal way because she is a total stranger to me. And the only reason for us to converse is my wife, who doesn't even care to think twice about my concerns. I found myself completely alone in a foreign country, surrounded by the very thing that ruined my life before and killed my parents and many other family members. Then I had to put her in her place by telling her that she was nothing but a stranger to me, who had no authority to tell me what to do and what not to do. And the fact that I expressed my discontent with drinking and the effect that it had on my life, and then she still insisted on it, was nothing but expressive of how unintelligent she was, despite her claiming to be an avid book reader and knowledge consumer. I basically just went off on her and blew all of the steam I had condensed within me before I went back to my room, packed all of my things, and bought myself a ticket back home the very following day. I know what I did was possibly wrong, as she had no way of understanding where I was coming from and had no experience with something so strange and different from what she was used to. But I was undergoing so much stress, and as somebody who genuinely had his life crushed because of alcohol and substances, the fact that it was being waved in my face like a carrot made me feel like a pig that wanted nothing more in the world than just to consume it. My wife quickly realized the gravity of what had actually happened and understood that it wasn't just because I was irritated or pressured. It was genuinely triggering to me. She apologized to her parents and had a dispute with her mother because of the way she handled me that day, and then bought a ticket back home and flew as soon as she could. I genuinely appreciate my wife standing by me in this situation, but sometimes I just sit and I wonder if I actually do have any control over myself, or if it's just that I've fallen into a situation that just tips me over the edge and back to my old ways. Next story. Backstory: I, 26 male, have wanted a horse since I was a little kid, and I had watched Back to the Future 3. I really wanted a horse. My parents got divorced when I was 3 years old, and my mom met my stepdad when I was 4. My dad met my stepmom Eden when I was 7, and she doesn't like me. I had taken riding lessons and it was great, but it wasn't enough. I needed to take care of and ride my own horse, so when I was 16, I decided to make it happen. I lived with my mom and stepdad, so I asked them if they could help me out a little, but they refused. So I went to my dad and we worked out a deal that he would help me buy the actual horse and the tack and equipment I'd need if I could get everything else settled first. That seemed reasonable, so I started working my butt off and saving as much money as I possibly could. A year after college, I managed to land an amazing job that pays enough to allow me to own a horse and gives me enough time off to bond with it. I have a mentor at work, Gene, and he wants to learn how to ride, so he asked and we decided that we could be roommates and I could teach him how to ride. A year after that, Gene and I got everything we needed, so I went to my dad and told him. He was ready to help me, but Eden intervened and refused to help. No matter how much Dad protested, Eden refused. I didn't get a written agreement, so there was nothing I could do. I was kind of mad, but kept saving. We got our horses a year after I got denied of mine, and we've had them for 14 months already. The actual post. I was visiting my dad a little bit last week and was telling him about my horse and how I taught Jean how to ride. Eden overheard this and asked if I could teach my stepsister, Ava, 14 female, how to ride a horse. I told her I could only if she bought her own horse because my horse, an Arabian quarter horse cross, is really skittish when new people try to ride her, and Jean's horse, a quarter horse, isn't mine to lend out, and Jean would be using it. Eden got mad that I wouldn't let her ride my horse, but I pointed out that we only had 2 horses and both would be in use. Eden angrily walked out and I thought that was the end of it. Earlier today, Eden and Ava showed up as Jean and I were preparing to ride. Eden started to talk to us about lessons again. Ava tried to sneak on my horse, but she got spooked and reared up, knocking Ava off. I went to calm my horse down and Jean went to check on Ava, while Eden just stood there yelling at me about my horse bucking people off. When she paused, I asked Ava if Eden told her that she could do that, and she said yes, so I told Eden to leave. She eventually left, but I kind of felt it was harsh. But I was still a little mad about her refusing to help me buy my horse, then expecting free lessons without providing anything. Am I the a-hole for wanting my stepmom to provide her own horse for her lessons and kicking her out? Not the a-hole. You told her your horse is skittish with new people. She didn't listen. Instead, she put her own daughter in danger with her entitled bish behavior. Don't allow Eden near the horses. Who knows what she might do next? I will bet you a month's salary that she will try to harm them someday or cause an accident and blame you for it. I'm staggered at this woman's audacity. First, she reneged on her agreement to facilitate the horse, then expected your hard work to benefit her daughter, then encouraged her child to approach an enormous animal you already told her would be dangerous. What in the actual F? Not the a-hole. Presuming that you board the horse, the stable business needs to be told in writing, certified mail about the incident. They need to be told that these people could come back and are not permitted anywhere near your horse. Keep a copy of your letter and of the receipt. If you keep your horses at your residence, you need to write a letter to Eden saying to stay away from your property and your horses. Again, keep a copy of the letter and the receipt. If this is your property, you definitely need to get some cameras because Eden will feel more comfortable trespassing there than she would be at a boarding facility. If your animal needs more training, then you need to make sure that this happens before the horse hurts someone. Happy trails. Next story. For context, I have a stepdaughter, Daisy, 15 female, who is very spoiled at times, and my husband, Roy, 37 male, enables Daisy's behavior a lot. Anytime Daisy doesn't get what she wants from me, she always whines to Roy, saying that I treated her very rudely, which is a white lie. And whenever she does, my Roy yells at me for not getting her what she wants. Then he continues to spoil her by getting her what she wants despite him not having much money. My Daisy and Roy have decided to stay over at my house during Christmas because theirs is infested with termites. We're planning on living together soon once we earn enough money. And since then, my Daisy has been quite a pain. Roy shares a checking account with me, so whenever he spends money, he spends mine too. So whenever my Daisy asks for something expensive, Roy uses half of my hard-earned money too. I work as a teacher, and must I add, my paycheck is an absolute joke. So I'm pretty broke during this holiday season. I've asked him to stop doing this multiple times, and he's done nothing, which pisses me off. Probably the a-hole on that. Roy also recently got fired from his job. He works at a grocery store currently, and he's not making much money, but he's looking for a better job like his old one, and I've agreed to let him use my money whenever he needs to, since he hasn't been making much money. And Daisy recently came up to me asking me for the newest iPad Pro, and I said no in my most serious tone. She got mad and then ran to her father crying. When I was at work eating lunch the next day, I got a call from my bank asking me if I was aware that $1,200 was spent. I dropped my phone dumbfounded. When I got home, I asked Roy if he spent this money on anything. He said yes, and I started yelling at him. He snapped back that Daisy had come up to him crying, saying, "Mom didn't want to get me anything for Christmas, so he bought her the iPad since I was being neglectful." I had enough and threatened to stop sharing a checkings account with him if he didn't stop enabling Daisy. Probably the a-hole on that too. I feel bad because that was really rude of me, and Roy is pretty broke at the moment, but he doesn't understand that I'm struggling to earn money while he's spending thousands of the money I'm saving up for bills on Daisy. Am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. Close the joint account immediately. Put your paychecks into an account that only you can access. You could also give Roy a set amount of money from your account each month if you wish to do so, but you shouldn't give Roy any money until that $1,200 has been repaid in some way. Not the a-hole. Return the iPad Pro, separate your finances now. He wants to spend money, then he needs to get a job and spend his own money. Do not listen to anything they've said about it or how unfair it is. When they say that, you remind them how unfair it is for them to keep spending your money without asking you.